Good morning and welcome to Saturday morning, June the 19th today. Juneteenth, the first official one, I guess, on the government calendar. And so it was a great event for sure that finally the Emancipation Proclamation was shared completely the last sharing, the last announcing of it, I guess, the last slaves freed in Galveston, Texas. Certainly a lot more needed to be done after that, but just like any declaration of independence, there's more work to be done yet. So happy Juneteenth to you today. All right, we continue on with Paul's journeys. We're with Paul in Ephesus this morning. Paul in Ephesus this morning. The suggested reading is Acts chapter 19, just a few verses, verses 8 through 10. Verse 10 is our lead-in verse today. All the Jews and Greeks who lived in the province of Asia heard the word of the Lord. Wow. All the Jews and Greeks who lived in the province of Asia heard the word of the Lord. Of course, later on, Paul will write a letter back to the church in Ephesus, and we get an idea here in Acts as well as there that Ephesus became a center from which the gospel went out to these other places. The pattern of Paul's evangelistic ministry in Ephesus was similar to that in Corinth. He began in the synagogue, but when the gospel was rejected, he moved to a secular venue. Looking back, we can learn from Paul in Corinth and Ephesus some important lessons about the where, the how, and the when of urban evangelism. Firstly, we notice the secular places Paul chose. In Corinth, the house of Titius Justus, and in Ephesus, the lecture hall of Tyrannus. Still today, religious people need to be evangelized in religious buildings, church being equivalent to synagogue. But secular people can better be reached in secular buildings, for example, through home evangelism or lecture evangelism. Secondly, notice the reasoned presentation Paul made. Luke uses two verbs 4 times each, one meaning to argue and the other to persuade. This man is persuading the people, the Jews complained to Gallio in chapter 18, verse 13. In both synagogue and lecture theater, Paul combined argument and persuasion, so that his approach was serious, well-reasoned, and convincing. Of course, arguments are no substitute for the Holy Spirit, but then trust in the Holy Spirit is no substitute for arguments. The Spirit of truth brings people to faith in Jesus, not in spite of the evidence, but because of the evidence when he opens their minds to attend to it. Thirdly, note the extended periods of time Paul stayed, 2 years in Corinth and 3 in Ephesus. His use of the hall of Tyrannus is particularly remarkable. The accepted text reads that he lectured daily for 2 years. But the Beeson text, and I'm not familiar with that, but the Beeson text adds from the 5th hour to the 10th. That is from 11 in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Assuming that Paul kept 1 day in 7 for rest and worship, a daily 5-hour lecture 6 days a week for 2 years comes to 3,120 hours of gospel argument. No wonder Luke comments that, quote, all the residents of the province of Asia, both Jews and Greeks, heard the word of the Lord. In other words, Paul stayed there long enough, I would assume, to have gained a reputation as someone who reasoned out the argument, the proof of the gospel well. What a challenge. What a challenge. What hard work Paul put into that. What time he devoted to it. There's a point where he says that he would even wish himself accursed if it meant that his people would come to Christ. He would give up his own salvation if it meant that others could be saved. That's commitment. It's the kind of commitment I think we still as the church need to have in our day. We need to be able to reason out, to argue, not aloud, veins popping out of our neck, arguing from an argument of a lawyer in a courtroom. I know we have a lot of lawyer TV shows, probably not like some of them, but just making the points, listing the evidence, as it were, and then putting that evidence together in a convincing fashion. That this is not made up, this is not a fairy tale. This truth of Christ coming into the world to seek and to save the lost, to die on a cross for us. Oh, the evidence of it. The arguing for it. Not being ashamed of it. For I, as Paul will say in Romans 1, I am not ashamed of the gospel of God, the gospel of Christ. For it is the power of God for salvation. Let's be students. Let's be proficient in being able to share the gospel truth with others who need to hear it and need to be convinced of it. May our lives be an important argument in that direction. Blessings to you today. Reveal the truth of Christ as you live out your day.